Hi, this is Michael Waits, and we are back on Indi, a Game Changer. Today we have Praveen Grover, VP and Managing Director for India at Ahead. Praveen, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, Michael. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is my complete pleasure. Before we get into the main part of this conversation, let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context, please.
Absolutely. My name is Praveen Grover. As you mentioned, I am VP and Managing Director for Ahead in India. I possess over 20 years of experience in enterprise technology and best shoring, with expertise in establishing India's shared services center for US IT companies to achieve strategic cost optimization and also improve customer experience. I have a proven track record in general management, P&L management, strategy, M&A, financial planning, people development, and IT. I also serve as an advisory board member for portfolio companies of select private equity firms. On the side, I serve as a chairman of Association of Technology Entrepreneurs, which is a non-profit organization that I helped found, and it's aimed at providing learning and networking opportunities to aspiring entrepreneurs. Michael, I'm also a history buff and an avid reader of biographies. I currently reside in Gurugram, which is a suburb of the capital, New Delhi, with my wife of 20 years, Sheetal, and my two kids, Ryan and Sophia.
Awesome. I used to say, I was born in 1965, right? And I used to say that like I was born at the exact right time for the way like the economic cycles in my life went and for the way the industry in which I chose to operate, right? Global financial services, they globalized. I was a foreign language speaker. They sent me overseas and it changed my life forever. And I think if I'd been born like 5 years earlier or like 5 or 6 years later, that I wouldn't have been able to do the stuff that I did. Do you feel similarly about the career you've had in India that like you were born at like just the right time to take advantage of all these things, all these confluence of events that came together to do the stuff that you do?
So, Michael, if this is a pretext to find out how old I
It's
am,
not.
I'm
It's not, but wow, that was really funny. Go ahead.
so again, I am happy to share with you that I was born in November 1974.
So you're much younger than I am.
So, good question. See, I first moved to the US as a 20-year-old graduate student in 1995.
Got it.
After graduating from business school in 1997 from Clark University in Massachusetts, I stayed over and lived and worked in the US for about 8 years.
Okay.
So that was in terms of timing, I mean, I would put it slightly differently. I would say that I have experienced all of the disadvantages for success. So,
How? How so? Is it just because you had to spend 8 years in Boston putting up with the snow and that terrible weather?
exactly, and eating beans out of a can.
Exactly.
See, in terms of timing, so I decided to move to, India back in 2003,
Right.
and that is when offshoring to India was in its infancy. There was sufficient momentum gathering around it. This may be a good time to also share with listeners about my professional journey and achievements. I built the first India operations in India for Tricore Solutions, a Boston-based leading provider of enterprise application management systems. That
Okay.
was back in 2003 when very few small and mid-sized companies were doing it. It was mostly the larger SIs that were coming to India.
Yeah.
So because, I was one of the founders of the company, I joined them as employee number 4. I was able to convince the management to open an India center. and we grew that center to about 400 employees. And then in 2017, we were acquired by Rackspace Technology. You may be familiar with the company.
Very.
With that acquisition, we became Rackspace Technology. At that time, Rackspace Technology had about 7,000 employees, Michael, and all of them were based in the US or UK.
Okay.
So we were Rackspace's initial employees at the India Center. So that worked out perfectly for us because we were one of the reasons that Rackspace acquired Tricor was because they wanted to build a India delivery center. So we were critical, to that acquisition. So I was the only Tricor founding member who stayed with the company. And then over the next few years, I expanded Rackspace's India Shared Services Center to more than 2,500 employees.
Okay. So I have to interrupt for a second because you said everything you did was set up for failure or got in the way of your success. But it sounds like it, and I mean this seriously, like it sounds like it's just the opposite, right? Because in a way, it would have been much more difficult for you to do what you did to set up this service delivery center if you hadn't gone to Boston, right? You hadn't gone there and started your own company, brought it home, and said, "I think there's an opportunity there." And this is all around risk taking. You should talk about that a little bit too, right? Because none of this was guaranteed. You said at the time that this offshoring was at its infancy, so there was no guarantee this was going to work. But the POC, right, the proof of concept was in 2017, and probably before that, when Rackspace came in and said, we need to have this as the seed that we plant to build a bigger service center and a bigger delivery center in India. It just feels like along the way, I don't want to say you're in the right place at the right time, but you made the right choices. I mean, life is just a series of choices, right? You made the right choices to be in the right place at the right time. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So I couldn't agree more, Michael, that our lives are the sum of our choices.
Yeah,
The way I look at it is that, first of all, I think it's not just me. I think every entrepreneur has the appetite for risk taking.
absolutely.
The way I look at risk taking, I mean, you could make the argument that no risk, no reward. That's the simple one. But the lesson that I have learned in my life is that risk often leads to reward.
Exactly.
So I decided to move back to India in 2003 without having a plan. And after that, convinced the leadership of my company to open an India delivery center. And my presence here enabled us to do that as a group. Now, Rackspace Technology acquired Tricor Solutions. It could easily have been IBM or Accenture. Now, we can make that argument today that we were in the right place at the right time, but at the same time, Rackspace had no prior experience best shoring to India. And Rackspace had been around since 1999.
Right.
They may have tried to do this before, but here was a company which has zero prior experience best shoring to India. So imagine working with that leadership and moving the needle of India Center head count from 0 to 50%.
Yeah, wow. Wow. Can you just talk a little bit more about this? Because it is kind of trite, right? To say no risk, no reward, no pain, no gain. These are very simple phrases that, in a way, don't mean anything. And I like to tell people that, like, taking risk doesn't mean jumping out of an airplane without a parachute and, excuse me, and hoping you survive. Like, risk taking, again, is just choice making at scale and making the right choices, but also having an understanding about what the landscape looks like and all these things, and then making a decision that other people may not make with maybe a little bit more insight. Is that fair?
So I think what you're trying to say, and I have first-hand experience with this, working closely with entrepreneurs over a number of years, that most entrepreneurs are actually not risk takers. They are what I would classify as risk mitigators.
Fair enough.
So, I mean, their job is to understand what the risk is and then alleviate that risk. So, with that said, I mean, my personal experience, like I said, has been that risk often leads to reward. what I have learned in my career is that there are, three key ingredients to being successful.
Go ahead.
For better or for worse, we live in a world, Michael, that rewards hard work,
Yep.
creativity, and risk taking. And you take any one of those three away, and then you are less likely to be successful, is what I have learned through my journey so far. And personally, I mentioned briefly that I'm a history buff. I also like to read philosophy from time to time.
Yeah.
My favorite philosopher is Friedrich Nietzsche. Who's written books about risk taking. He's some of his quotations are thrown around loosely, may not be attributed to him,
Right.
such as live dangerously, build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius, send your ships out onto uncharted seas.
Yeah.
And I've been a firm believer in all of that.
Yeah.
So not so much about risk taking, but what Nietzsche is saying, is pushing you to get out of your comfort zone
Exactly.
and try new things. So, when I was at Rackspace Technology, when I left the company, this is in 2002 in August. At that time, we'd already built the India Center to about 2,500 employees. Things were humming along just fine. But I was missing the action. I figured, this is I'm 48 years old, and if I want to try something new, now is the time.
Right.
And that's when I decided to leave Rackspace Technology and then take a break for 6 months, and then find the next thing.
There is a certain joy that goes along with that early stage risk. I'm just going to stay with that word in going from zero to something much bigger. There's just a pure joy from it. And if you're in a job, because I've been there as well, right, where you're just doing the same thing over and over again, it's humming really nicely, the revenue's growing, there's nothing really wrong, except it's just not exciting anymore. And you know you can do more, and you want to go back to the beginning and see if you can replicate that success in another way. I'm presuming after your 6 month break, you said to yourself, I need to find that right opportunity to kind of see if I can do that again and maybe even do it a little bit bigger. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, joy is one word. I would use the word fulfilling.
Yeah.
The other day, me having a conversation with my 16-year-old son
I
who's
love it.
getting ready to apply for colleges. And the advice that I want to give him as he starts this next journey of his life is that, don't aspire to be happy. Don't aspire to have a happy life. Instead, aspire to have a more meaningful and fulfilling life. That's why I left Rackspace and then I wanted to look for the next venture. Except in my case, I mean, if you combine, Michael, so my journey has been interesting or is singular rather, because if you combine my tenure at Rackspace and Tricor before that,
Right.
I had a combined tenure of 22 years with a single company.
Wow.
So for someone in my position, I figured that the for me to start the next thing, I should, as Cortez did when he reached the New World, burn my ships
Yeah.
and just get out of Rackspace Technology as step one. And that is what is going to motivate me to make those significant efforts to look for the next bigger, better, more meaningful opportunity.
So if you burn your ships, right, what do you think the biggest risk is you have to mitigate when you start from scratch? You're not starting from scratch per se, right? Because you have all this embedded knowledge. It's different than when you start something from scratch when you're 25, because you don't have all the experience to lean on. But to be fair, I did this a couple of times. You're having a great career at Morgan Stanley. I could pick up the phone and call anybody in London or New York and get anything done that I wanted. And then I went to Goldman Sachs. Not directly, but I went to Goldman Sachs, right? And I didn't know anybody. And I had this vision of just like, I'll just keep doing the same thing, call the guy in New York or call the guy in London, but it doesn't work like that, right? But you were completely switching everything. So you'd really burned your ships. So what, what,
Absolutely.
what did you think was the biggest risk you had to mitigate after that? And then I want to talk about ahead.
Sure, sure. So at that time, after I made the move, the biggest risk before I landed ahead for me was whether I will be able to find the right opportunity.
Yeah.
So I was less concerned about making the opportunity a success
Right.
because compared to when I started Tricor in 2003, I now had over 2 decades of experience behind me.
Yeah.
So at the time, I figured, okay, the greatest risk is not finding the right opportunity, which I wanted to be bigger and better than my current one. However, I will again go back to about how risk leads to reward. And I was speaking with a friend of mine. This is during the transition phase before I joined Ahead. I said the same thing to her, Michael. I said, what if I don't find the right opportunity? And he told me something that resonates true now, that a person with your capabilities will create the right
That's a very good friend. But the risk really is, though, the risk really is you make a choice, right? Because you're with basically the same company or entity for 22 years, right? So there's a lot of discomfort potentially of moving. And because it was so successful, if you make the wrong choice, which is possible, right? Then you have to not try even harder. Do you know what I mean? But it's much more complicated than to create the right opportunity inside of something where maybe there wasn't like a cultural fit or the right fit or whatever. So it's a very different choice. Remember, you said you were one of the founders of Tricor. So when you said to them, "I'm going to go back to India. I don't know what I'm going to do," and then you convinced them to do something, they trusted you inherently because you had already always been there, right? But now you've got to rebuild that
right.
again. So yeah, I understand. Like you'll create the right opportunity, but still there was risk there. I think. Anyway, let's talk about Ahead now. Now what you're doing,
Yeah, yeah. So, on a related note, and I get this asked very often, Michael, and I think this would be of interest to our listeners
please.
as to what have been my greatest learnings, the lessons that I have learned
Yeah,
through this transition from Rackspace technology to Ahead. And I want to share this with listeners just to motivate other people who may be in a similar position. And there is no way I could have learned these lessons without going through the pain and suffering, as Nietzsche mentioned.
yeah,
The number one lesson that I learned, I want to share with listeners, is the value of work in your life. People do work for paycheck, it is important, but in addition to that, work itself gives meaning to our life, regardless of how much money a person has already made. That's one. The second lesson that I learned is that it's not the journey, it's not the destination, but it's the company that you keep. So, the number one thing that I missed was the company of my fellow colleagues,
yeah.
who some of whom, worked with me for 15, 20 years.
Right.
And lesson number three that I learned, which was mentioned to me by the same friend I referred earlier, is that, Michael, there is no upper limit to three things in life: wisdom, beauty, and wealth. You can always do better. There is always a next level.
Yeah, yeah. These things are actually really important. Can I just start with the second one, if you don't mind? It's the company that you keep. I think this is actually really important. And this kind of gets back to what I was telling you before. It wasn't just the idea that I knew who to call in
Yeah.
London and New York, right? Because that was part of my job. It was that when work was over, the guys and gals that I had left behind were just out to dinner with somebody else, right? It was very strange. And
Yes,
that really does matter, like the company that you keep, because in a way it's way more important than the company at which you work. Yeah.
absolutely. That's your work family.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
it just turns off like that, and that has a profound impact on you and on the others.
For sure. Because you're not there either, right? And they're missing you at the same level. But also your life
Yes.
experience becomes really different. And I want to touch this if you don't mind, because I think I know what you mean here. There's no upper limit to wisdom, beauty, and wealth. And you can spend a ton of time trying to chase a little bit more of this and a little bit more of that and a little bit more of wealth. But at the end of the day, your life is not going to be marginally better if you just continue, because there's no upper limit, so there's no way to stop. There's no way to know when to stop. So it's just a really important lesson to learn, right? You have to start chasing the right things. And I think it gets back to this thing you were telling your son. You're not even chasing happiness. You're chasing meaning. You're chasing fulfillment. And that's different.
Exactly. So all of that is true, Michael, but I think the context in which my friend referenced this is that regardless of where you come from, you can do better.
Both of those things are true.
Yeah,
Yeah, both of those things are true. Yeah. And I completely
exactly.
understand that. Completely. The way I live now resembles nothing about the way that I grew up at all.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So coming to ahead.
Yes.
So I was introduced to the executive leadership team of ahead in August of 2022. I left Rackspace in July. So I was introduced to this company by a mutual friend in the private equity space. And I was fascinated when I read about the company. So Ahead was formed in 2007.
Okay.
That year, the company did in excess of $3 billion in revenue.
In year one.
So it's not a small company.
Oh, no, in 2022.
In 2022,
Got it.
when I was introduced to the company has about 24 locations across the US. And what particularly pulled me towards the company is that the founder is the CEO of the company today.
Still.
So similar to how my journey was with Truckcore Solutions, I think there is something very special about founder-owned and operated companies.
Agreed.
So I had a series of meetings with the executive leadership team that was through the end of 2022, and then some very good promising meetings. And then in 2022 October, they invited me to come over to Chicago and meet with them in person. So I traveled to Chicago, my first visit to that beautiful city. Absolutely love it. Almost like a larger, or it's like right like midway between Boston and New
Yeah,
York.
it should have felt very familiar to you,
Uh,
actually. Yeah.
absolutely, very provincial in that way, similar to Boston.
Right.
And I was already used to the weather, like I said. So, so I traveled there for a couple of days. You know, I had 2 days, a series of meetings with the executive leadership team. I was fortunate enough to have a meeting with Daniel Adamany, who is the founder and CEO of the company. He and I spent a couple of hours together. So the message that I took from there is that they have been wanting to do this, and now that the company is ready to go to the next level, they want to invest in a world-class service delivery center in India, but we don't know how to do it because
Yeah.
we haven't done that before. So the logical next step was that we prepare a business plan for the India Center for the next 3 years. And I was very happy with the outcome of that first visit because I figured that they are serious about it and they want to do it the right way. So through the end of 2022, I worked closely with their executive leadership team. We prepared an India Center plan for the next 3 years, and we took it through a series of approvals. And I officially joined them in January as MD and Vice President heading the India Center. So, in summary, Ahead India, it's one of the strategic investments that we made in 2023. Our aim is to scale our service delivery capacity and expand and diversify our recruiting pipeline. So, in terms of progress to date, we formalized Ahead India as a legal entity. We hired a core team. We've also built out our real estate. We've successfully done functional integration, and we actually started our hiring of service delivery personnel in September of last year. So far, so good. What is important to me is that the leadership at Ahead is and I we are fully aligned in terms of our India strategy. And I would like to share that with our listeners for other companies that have aspiration to build a service delivery center in India, which is, from the start, I was clear about this that if we are to be successful in India, because, it can go either way.
Yeah.
I've known it to be a very, very successful, and I've also known it to be a complete disaster. Is that companies must see India as a long term and strategic destination for our core services that ultimately improve customer value and drive profits.
Right.
As a result, the company is also able to offer cutting edge technology work and make the career of the India Center employees meaningful, impactful.
Yeah.
I think the number one mistake that companies make when entering India is that they see India as a short term staffing destination, or they outsource low end automated type of tasks.
Interesting.
So they are not able to add any value.
What do you think was the biggest insight that you gave to Daniel when you met with him and the rest of the senior management team that maybe they hadn't expected you to give to them? The thing that they were like, oh, I get it now because of this. And this is different than what you said just now, right? Because you said you have to have a long-term strategic vision for it. You have to look at it as like a long-term strategic way to deliver the best, highest quality services. And obviously to make the employees feel engaged and fulfilled. That's fair. But like you said, sometimes it can go pear-shaped. So when you were sitting there talking to them over that 3 to 4 month period initially, what were some of the insights you offered to them when they were like, okay, now I get it. Now we definitely have to do this, and we have to look at it in the way that you explained?
So I clearly remember that eureka moment, Michael, uh, which was that I explained to them the how the operating model ought to work at India. As we proceed in India, we will do so with the following guiding principles. Number one, the Ahead India employees are fully badged Ahedians, as in permanent full-time employees of the company.
Yeah.
We do not outsource to third-party service providers, nor do we bring in contractors, which is how we maintain high quality of service.
Yep.
Second, Ahead India employees are organized around US practices, and they operate as one team and drive a cohesive culture and client experience. So, as far as the customer is concerned, they are getting service from Ahead as opposed to Ahead in India or Ahead in the US.
Right.
In fact, I don't even like the phrase Ahead India. I refer to it as Ahead in India. And then number three is that, starting out, we are primarily targeting hiring for delivery services personnel in our managed services and digital solutions groups
Yep.
because they had some prior experience outsourcing to third party service providers offshore.
Okay.
And then we are, slowly building practices for other groups as well at the India Center. Overall, so far, we have been extremely successful. We are super excited for Ahead in India, and we believe that this will allow us to better meet our client needs for larger service engagements, flexible cost structures, and follow the sun support.
So how big do you think Ahead gets in the next like 3 to 5 years? And like what type of people are you planning on hiring?
Like I mentioned, right now, our focus is around managed
Yep.
services and digital solutions group. And our 3-year plan involves hiring upward of 1,000 people in India with possible expansions in southern India. We're looking at either Hyderabad or Bangalore.
So that's what I was going to ask you as well. Right now, you're concentrated in Gurgaon,
Yes.
but you're going to expand. I mean, India's a gigantic country. Did this also surprise the guys and gals in New York on the management team, just how vast India was? But also, did you have to explain to them how different it was in different states? And like, it's always been explained to me that you could literally go 100 miles in one direction and 100 miles in another direction and just feel like you're in a completely different place. Was that necessary to explain to them as well?
So I think at this point in time, most leaders in the IT space are well informed about India. However, when people think about outsourcing to India, they think about cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad that have traditionally been more popular. I strongly recommended that we open our flagship facility in Gurgaon for several reasons. The close proximity to the capital, New Delhi. There is abundant IT talent pool available here. Also, the workforce is largely English speaking. There is also less demand pressure as compared to cities like Bangalore,
Okay.
and also the salary cost is moderate. In fact, I would share an interesting statistic with our listeners that Gurugram has very quickly. So when we say Delhi NCR, Delhi National Capital Region, that includes New Delhi, Noida, and Gurugram, this region has quickly become home to the largest number of IT companies in India and is among the leader when it comes to foreign direct investment recipient
Okay.
in India.
So strategically really important.
Absolutely. And then, it is easier to sell India as the primary destination for outsourcing. I also think that India is the most natural business partner for the United States, as both companies are English speaking, free market,
Yep.
and dedicated to the rule of law.
Yeah. It feels like there's a real symbiosis there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about like what has given rise to the digital solutions and then maybe talk about where cybersecurity fits into that as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, the increasing demand for digital solutions across enterprises is a response to the evolving business landscape. And we at Ahead recognize this shift, and we are poised to deliver tailored programs addressing specific IT needs. Our approach ensures that the delivery of services directly relevant to business objectives, making Ahead a customer-centric extension aligning with the culture of Ahead in the US. Now, as far as the rise of digital transformation, I think there are several reasons behind it, several enablers. One is, increasingly organizations are trying to do process improvement. They want to reduce IT complexity. There's been an increasing digitization of all aspects of life, not just the enterprise world.
Yeah.
Also, future proofing, which is a term often heard in business consulting parlance,
Right.
is the term future proofing my business. Then, changing the culture of the company, adopting new technologies, also changing external forces and competitive positioning. And then organization around the globe are taking a new direction as far as customer engagement is concerned.
Yeah.
Digital transformation being our key business, I just want to take a minute and mention about how Ahead's approach is different to managed IT services from our competitors. So, our approach to managed IT services sets us apart, as in we operate a captive center in India. Our India employees are fully based Ahedians, fostering a unified team and culture for a seamless client experience. And our commitment extends to not outsourcing to third-party service providers, providing stability and reliability in our operations.
Yeah. I think this concept that you mentioned earlier that being the managing director in India, like words have meaning, right? And they also have subtlety. And this idea that you're not the MD and the VP at Ahead for India, it's in India. And this creates a hopefully what you're trying to do is create this culture of, like you said, connectivity. We're not the team like that just is India. We're part of the entire team and we happen to be located in India. And I think that if you're talking about also not hiring contractors and not outsourcing to third parties, it makes a big difference to people. I think to feel like it's like hiring a contractor to come into your house and do some work, and then when they're done, they leave. It's not like being part of your family. And I think if you have people being full fledged Ahedians, if that's what you're calling them, it just feels like it's more connected. And I think it's a great strategy. And if your competitors aren't necessarily doing that, they're missing out because it may be a little less expensive on the margins, but at the end of the day, it becomes more expensive from a training perspective, from a stability perspective, and all the things that you're trying to disintermediate and get back to what you're talking about, this risk mitigation, feels like it's a better strategy to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will take the liberty of quoting our CEO Daniel Adamany, who's mentioned a couple of times that he has a strong preference for engaging permanent full-time employees because he says he regards contractors as mercenaries.
Yeah, yeah.
I think what he means is, in terms of the commitment to the organization
It
and
goes
its
both ways.
customers. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when Dan visited the India Center, and we did a major kickoff event, and we had about 100 employees at the event, and I asked him, Dan, what is it that strikes you first when you look at your India workforce? What is the first thing comes to mind? And he said that, Praveen, the first thing that strikes me is how young the workforce is,
Yeah,
which is the case for India in general,
right,
that, most people are in their 20s or early 30s.
right.
And I said, there you go, there you go. And just so you know that young people don't make good mercenaries
No, they don't. They don't know
because
enough.
because because young people need a cause to fight.
Yeah.
So it just aligns perfectly with how the demographics is at India. I'll quickly touch upon cyber security, as you mentioned. So, cyber security, that's a critical concern in today's digital landscape. AHEAD is committed to addressing this challenge by providing robust cybersecurity solutions. Our approach includes personalized solutions for business, ensuring the delivery of services directly aligned with client security objectives. Our solutions encompass automated asset discovery, file integrity monitoring, intrusion detection, event correlation, vulnerability assessment, log management, dark web monitoring, user activity monitoring, and security orchestration, among others.
Where digital products exist and cybersecurity is an issue, protection of those products and those digital assets, or even just your digital infrastructure, becomes necessary. And there are breaches that are just going to happen naturally, no matter how much work you do, right? It's an arms race. The more cybersecurity you put in, the more the hackers try to get in. Like, what role do you think insurance and insurance partnerships play to, again, mitigate some of that risk? In other words, is there an opportunity that may feel like unrelated, but could be super related to also supply insurance products to some of the partners with whom you work?
Certainly, certainly. So, I mean, again, this comes down to, risk mitigation. I think organizations around the world, we make investments in our cybersecurity efforts, and having cyber liability insurance or cybersecurity insurance, as it's called, is just part of that risk mitigation.
Yeah.
And we are seeing increasingly, more and more companies investing in insurance for cyber security. I mean, it typically includes first party coverage of losses uncovered through data destruction, hacking, data extortion, and data theft. And I think we will continue to see that in the future.
Okay. And before I let you go, I want to come back to the beginning of the conversation. You mentioned that I don't know if you're a founder or the chairman of the Tech Entrepreneur Association. Why is this important to you? And again, just getting back to this concept of like living a meaningful life, where do you get the meaning out of this as well?
So, this is something that is very close to my heart. In addition to all of the work that I do at AHEAD, there are two non-profits that I'm involved in. One is the Association of Technology Entrepreneurs. This is in Gurgaon. I am the chairman and one of the founders, where we meet with young aspiring entrepreneurs. We try to do it once a month
Mm-hmm.
and help them, give them coaching and guidance from our experience on how to become successful entrepreneurs. And this is something that had helped me tremendously when I started my journey.
Yeah.
I mentioned that at the start of my career, I joined a company as employee number 4.
Right.
What drew me to that company at that time was the founder of the company, Bob Foreman. He and I are still very good friends. So what mattered to me at that time, Michael, was that I go work for Bob
Right.
because there was so much I could learn from him. So that's one. And I think the greatest lesson that I learned through that journey and which I impart upon these young and inspiring entrepreneurs is that there will be failures, there will be setbacks, there will be difficult days. You should not see that as an end. You
Yeah.
should see them as an inevitable step towards your eventual success.
Exactly.
Is the mindset you need to be a successful entrepreneur. Just I will quickly mention the second nonprofit that I am passionate about is an inner city youth development program where we help students in disadvantaged urban communities to reach their full potential.
Good for you. That's the perfect way to end. Thank you, Praveen Grover, VP and Managing Director of India. That was awesome. I didn't expect anything less. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me, Michael. Great talking to you.